أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. بسم الله. So, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to Islam and Atheism. You might be surprised because you may have been expecting somebody else for this particular session, namely Mu'izz Masood, who, as you know, he's a very famous producer in the Arab world in particular, very well known speaker. He's spoken at various avenues, mashallah, in the top 50 or the top 500 Muslim list. So unfortunately, just because of various issues that he's facing with regards to his family, he couldn't make it today. So he did want to send on his apologies. So it's a great sadness that we can't have him. But alhamdulillah, by the tawfiq of Allah, we agreed to have a session with myself and Subboor. One, because we're really good friends, and two, this is a topic that both of us have a lot to think about and say about. So we just wanted to have an informal conversation, and hopefully that can be informative to all of you here. In the middle of all this, feel free to chip in your questions, raise your digital hand, and hopefully you can take part in the conversation as well. So without further ado, Assalamu alaikum, Subboor. Welcome to Islam and Atheism. I think this is your second course, right? Second class for this course, right?
Wa alaikum salam. Yes, it is. Yeah. I
Yeah,
very much enjoy the interaction with the students. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, alhamdulillah. So there some of these students I know. For example, I remember Nu'man, I remember Lamia, mashallah. Athar is a friend from Pakistan. So there are a few familiar faces. The rest I don't know or don't know yet, but inshallah we'll hopefully get to know one another. So Subboor, the topic today that we have at hand is spirituality and atheism, right? So, and I know you've had a lot of conversations about this because both respect to seeing it from the atheistic side based on how atheists try to justify spirituality, but also from the Islamic side. So I think what might be helpful is to do some stage setting together, right? So when we talk about atheism, how do modern day atheists view the world? Like, what is their interpretation of the world, and how do they kind of give it a meaningful expression? Because I think part of being spiritual is trying to have a meaningful understanding of the world around them, and then and attaching a sense of affinity to that, right? Or would you say otherwise?
No, you're right. And just so that everyone understands how important this is for atheists to flourish, how important spirituality is, I wanted to highlight a really interesting statement which someone said, right? And I just want you to imagine, like, if you heard this statement, who do you imagine would say such a thing, right? So there is nothing irrational about seeking the states of mind that lie at the core of many religions. Compassion, awe, devotion, and feelings of oneness are surely amongst the most valuable experiences a person can have. So here, what's being conveyed is something you'd hear from a vicar, an imam, a rabbi, or a Buddhist, speaking about oneness and speaking about how these peak states are the most valuable experience you can essentially have. But this is not coming from a traditional religious person. This is something which Sam Harris said. And Sam Harris is one of the four horsemen, the younger of the four horsemen, but nonetheless still quite important in the new atheist movement. Yet, he didn't just make this statement and face a massive backlash from the atheist community. There were many who resonated with him. And one of the really funny things Asadullah Ali said when we were doing a live was that half of the new atheist movement was taken away by Jordan Peterson. And the reason why that was funny is because, Peterson's earlier sort of claim to fame was based upon not just the issues to do with gender identity. It was actually to do with his ideas of meaning, which were very biblical. And that's attracted a lot of people who just didn't believe in God. And now, when we look at their perspective, something that you started off with, what is their perspective? Most atheists are naturalists. So they believe that everything can be broken down to essentially the physical. So spirituality is something which wouldn't really fit in their worldview. Yet, what I found, and this is just my own experience, but later on, I saw that this was the experience of others as well, and now we have people like Sam Harris and others talking openly about it, is that atheists have never been shy to speak about spirituality. I remember I had a talk at a college some 12 years ago. It was a very long time ago. It was an A-level college. And the headmistress, I was speaking to her and I asked her, do you believe in God? And she said, no, but I'm spiritual. And she said it very proudly. And what's interesting is that atheists usually try and distance themselves from everything that religious people do to try and make their identity distinct. But spirituality is one thing they don't want to leave behind. That's something they still want to subscribe to. So I think the way that you started off, Shoaib, you spoke about why is it important for them? Why having that particular perspective, that the idea that there's meaning and value and purpose in the world. It's simply because you simply cannot function in this world without having some sort of meaning. Just go back to things even in that you read at a popular level, like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He speaks about the religious Jewish people as compared to the irreligious or godless Jewish people who were in the concentration camps. And the ones who were religious, who gave meaning to their suffering, they could bear a lot of suffering compared to those who can't. And that you can extrapolate to the human experience. So I think a lot of atheists are yearning for spirituality, and they try and anchor it within their naturalistic framework. And in fact, Sam Harris is very adamant that we don't need God in order to be spiritual. And in fact, he finds the whole notion of needing some sort of theism in order to ground spirituality. He just finds that idea absurd. He thinks theists don't have a monopoly on spirituality, and atheists can live a meaningful spiritual life without traditional religious beliefs. So one of the other things that he says is everything of value that people get from religion can be had more honestly without presuming anything on insufficient evidence. The rest is self-deception set to music. So it's very interesting that he's basically saying everything that you can get from religion, you can get the same level of spirituality without religion. And one last thing which I found from him, which I found really bizarre, is obviously he's got his book Waking Up, a Guide to Spirituality Without Religion, and he's got some talks on this. But there's one thing I found which a lot of people don't know of, Shoaib. It's very interesting. He posted on his website a Quranic recitation. I believe it was Sheikh Sudais, right? And it's really powerful, and it shows the haram, and it shows Muslims who are emotional. And he has this description of what he's feeling when he listens to this recitation, which, in his words, bring up ecstasy in him. And then he goes on to say that because of this ecstatic state that has been evoked because of this type of recitation, then Muslims go on and they do suicide bombing, and then he used it for his his usual route of attacking religion. But that's I think a good way of introducing the topic of how important it is for people like Sam Harris and others as well.
Yeah, so interesting enough, as you were speaking, the book that came to my mind was this book right here that I'm sharing, Sam Harris, Waking Up, a Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. And what's interesting is that before he even published this book, there's a scholar by the name of Alain de Botton. He's a French scholar, and he actually talks about, even though atheists, are very adamant, and they were particularly very aggressive shortly after the new atheist formation, 2006, 2007. On the online space, because remember, atheism isn't like a group of people that you can find concentrated prior to the internet, right? So because religious people are, you can say, that's the Jewish bloc, that's the Muslim bloc, that's but atheists were kind of scattered about, and so that's why there was this orchestrated effort to kind of put people together. And in that book, Alain de Botton, what he says is that he refers to this entire movement as Atheism 2.0, where atheists have started developing passages of rights. They welcome people, like they have celebration when people enter the fold of atheism. They enter the fold, they have their own marriage rituals, right? And it's that they have their church of atheism, for example. So it seems like atheism, the way it's sociologically folding out, is that it still wants to have this recognition or these practices of religion without the baggage of the constraints, or not the constraints, but the obligations of religion, which includes beliefs in the existence of our God. And I think what this goes to show is, all of this circles back to one thing for me. So it's that one verse where if you forget yourself, Allah will forget you.
SubhanAllah.
That's what it all circles back to, right? And I think these guys, they are just kind of replacing God with all these things. And it boils down to only two things, right? It's either them boiling down to their desires. They want to just follow their nafs, right? And there's another verse where your nafs becomes your God, right? Or it's just a matter of they don't want to deal with the shubuhat that they've been plagued with, or they don't want to do the intellectual effort to be able to engage with them. Because sometimes I do come across some people who, they know. I mean, it's quite absurd to think that. And I'll use a very visual example, right? So this cup, do you think that this can pop out of existence from nowhere? And they'll say no. And then I extend that to the entire universe. So you believe this can't come, but this thing can, right? And just that like intuitive force, they get super skeptical with when it comes to this big question. And I think that it boils down to that shubuhat aspect or the shahawat aspect, the doubt and desire. And I think that for me, and this is the reason why both of these are important, right? The intellectual stuff gets you grounded in solidifying that yes, there is a God and there is an existence in this reality. And the tazkiyah, the nafs aspect, the tasawwuf aspect, helps you allow you to understand that you have a spiritual aspect as well that you need to work on, just like you feed your stomach, right? That you to live, you need this spiritual components as well to have a more spiritually meaningful life. And I think what I see in this, in these sociological movements where Alain de Botton says that these people are trying to talk about practices and rights, this is them trying to replicate religion without any of that. So those were my observations, particularly when I started reading about atheism about 10, 15 years ago. I don't know, what do you think of that?
That's very interesting. In fact, when you were speaking, one of the things that I was thinking of is John Gray, in his book, 7 Types of Atheism, gives the example of the atheist churches, which you just mentioned, that in the late part of the 19th century or the early part of the 20th century, when these communities were being set up, because they wanted the same Christian feeling of community and family, they created their churches. And one of the things that they did is that to try and bring around these cohesive values, they had these uniforms that you'd need to wear to go to church, the atheist church. And the only way to wear the uniform is that somebody else would have to actually help you put it on. You'd have buttons on the back. So it forced people to meet up even before they went to the church. So you can see that down to the T, they want all the benefits of religion. And I think you gave a very comprehensive understanding of their motivation. What is it that they are motivated by? And I think that's what's important here. I mean, one way I can think of, I'm just thinking of an example, that you may come across a Muslim who, for some reason, has been, I just noticed my camera was all over the place, a Muslim who was put into a lot of doubts, like you said, doubts and desires. But this Muslim is going through a lot of doubts, but they want to remain upon Islam. And sometimes by the time they get evidence to remain upon Islam, there may be a lot of time that's passed between the time that they've sorted out their doubts and the doubts started. But what keeps them in Islam at that period in which they have a lot of doubts is that the metaphysical backdrop of Islam, which protects you from nihilism, protects you from all sorts of other existential crises, they use that to hold on to Islam until they get sufficient evidence, because they can't think, if I wasn't a Muslim, how would I live? What would be the meaning of life? How would I make sense of my mum that passed away last year? And all these types of things. And the same thing I believe the atheists are going through, Shoaib, that they don't, even though I believe, and I'm sure anybody who looks at it objectively, they believe that it's so hard to marry naturalism and spirituality. They just don't seem to go together. However, it's the scariest idea possible, that everything is absolutely meaningless, which is they want to run away from that. And that's why they would shoehorn spirituality within a naturalistic framework.
So this is the reason why I find these new atheists completely superficial. The only atheist who was brave enough to face the consequences of atheism was Friedrich Nietzsche. He was the only one who understood the complete entailment of atheism. It meant a complete loss of the moral framework, complete loss of meaning, absolute nihilism at the very end root of it. And that is a life that is very, very hard to digest, incredibly hard to digest. And so that's why I personally believe that all these, I mean, even Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, he makes it very clear that this new strand of atheism, it's the poorest lot in comparison to the history of atheism. It's the poorest lot. Absolutely pathetic if you compare them to Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, right? And I think that Nietzsche serves as a lesson for particularly for the case of this study, but also for new atheists as well, because Nietzsche was, I felt that he was intellectually very honest with himself, that if you absorb atheism, fundamentally there is no meaning at the bottom end. There is no meaning at the bottom end. And that's why he came up with this idea of the Ubermech, these supermen, that these supermen have to face this abyss in front of them, where there's nothing at the end of the barrel, zero, zilch. And I think that's the part which cannot be removed, because existentially, historically, as well as anthropologically, humans have a yearning for meaning. Humans have always had a yearning for meaning, right? And so Jean-Paul Sartre, right? He's a famous existentialist, French philosopher, right? So Muslims believe that our purpose precedes our existence. I'll repeat that, right? Our purpose comes before our existence, right? Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, Khalaq al-Insan. So Rahman, right? Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, Khalaq al-Insan. Allah told us, He told us our purpose before He even created us, right? It's to study the Quran, right? Or basically ingest those principles, those deeply seated principles. And one of the lessons you take away from that is your purpose precedes your existence. What did Jean-Paul Sartre say in his philosophy? He says, existence precedes your purpose. Your purpose is whatever you make of it. He switched the boat. He completely switched the boat, right?
Really,
and I think, so this is something that I think that I find in these postmodern thinkers, is that one, you have very sophisticated thinkers like Nietzsche who were brutally honest, and they put these new atheists to shame. And then Jean-Paul Sartre, and I think Jean-Paul Sartre is the one who I feel was the person who took shahawat to its ultimate desire, that you construct your own meaning. You exist. That's the starting point. Your meaning is open to whatever you want it to be. You want to live a life where you have no entailments, no obligations to society, go for it. You want to live a life of rock and roll and drugs, go for it. You want to live a life of sex and pure sex, nothing else, go for it. That's the kind of entailment. And what's surprising is, right, this is where the science kicks in really well. We have lived with postmodernism, the sexual revolution, drugs, and all of these cases because of these kinds of philosophies, and the implications that they have been negative for society. We have seen in the West more than any other an increase in divorce rates. We have increase in depression. Mental depression is on the rise. Suicides are on the rise. And I think all of this is because that actual core, which Allah constantly addresses in the Quran, but I feel it's literally this, is that we have forgotten our purpose, or rather, we have effaced our purpose.
Absolutely, absolutely. It seems unlinked, but I think there is a link to be made. I recently met with Nick Griffin, who is the former leader of the BNP. I'm not sure if you're aware of this figure. So, you know, far right. Basically, you can imagine the head of is essentially all of the racist sort of nonsense that you saw over decades in the UK. And I just had a very frank chat with him about the West and where the West was headed, and he's also been very vocal on Twitter. So he's been attacking Muslims in Islam for dog's years. However, what's interesting is he's a practicing Christian, and he's seeing his people, declining in number, and he doesn't accept anybody born in this country to be a British person. He gives the example of India and says, you know, the British were there for 5 generations and then they left. They're not Indian. So, you know, and one of the things that he's been doing recently, which in the past he didn't do, was actually praising the Muslims who he previously was critical of, and praising them on their family values. And he's been critical of the godless society that he did not grow up in. He's 60 something. So previously, you know, he saw Britain as a religious country. And as it's become irreligious, he's seen those social ills you're talking about. The breakdown in the nuclear family, alcoholism, drug abuse, homelessness. I mean, there's so many social ills linked to your worldview. And, you know, you said earlier that every single society requires some sort of, meaning for it to flourish. I remember a few years ago, I came across a statement by an anthropologist who was studying indigenous communities. And he actually made a very similar statement about society, about the societies that he observed, that it wasn't actually to do with their resources which allowed them to flourish. It was their metaphysical worldview. And these are just indigenous societies. So it's not like it's true today and it wasn't true in the past. These are people that are pretty close to hunter-gatherer societies that he was studying, right? So I don't remember the reference of it, but if you go onto YouTube and you put in Nihilism, the Dark Path, it's a video, and you'll find the reference in that video. There's actually a whole bunch of stuff about nihilism. Because remember, nihilism and spirituality, if we're going to talk about atheism, you have to mention both, because nihilism, obviously, you can't be a nihilist and be spiritual. I mean, that's an interesting avenue for us to explore. We have these implications of a naturalistic perspective, that everything is meaningless, and then within that subjective meaning, they're trying to create a window for them to discuss spirituality. What do you think of this? Do you think this is a purely fruitless endeavor, or do you think somehow they can try and have some room for spirituality within a naturalistic framework?
So to be honest, I mean, I've tried really hard to appreciate how people like Sam Harris can say that it's just, it's a cognitive state that you're in, right? That's all it is. It's when you have certain excited states in your brain and you have a buzz. That's what spirituality really is, right? But then I remember seeing one of your videos, Subboor, and you stated it really powerfully. I follow your videos, by the way, in case you didn't know. I do listen to your videos. So this was a lecture that you did in Lums in Pakistan, right? I think it was no. It was not in Lums. It was somewhere in Rawalpindi, I think. Anyways, it was a red background, and you said something to the effect of, right? Equality, justice, love, mercy. On naturalistic, none of these exist. It's just atoms. And that was a very powerful statement. I was like, whoa. I mean, that hit me very hard. Because you summarized it so well. It was done really, really well. And the same thing goes here, right? If we are just atoms, everything here is just a facade.
Yeah.
Everything is just a facade, right? So I don't think that there is a sense where at the very core of things, it is a huge form of delusion. It
Mm,
really is a huge form of delusion. And
yeah.
because I mean, so as I get older, I'm 35. Maybe I have another 35 years left. I see death in front of me all the time. The people that I knew, some of my school friends have died. Some of my family members have died. It's not long before I'm going to hit the grave. So of course you naturally think about death, the akhirah all the time, right? And sometimes I get scared. I don't want to die, right? I don't want to die. It's this is a hope I have, right? That's why I always try to do whatever I can to kind of please Allah as best as I can. But coming to the point at hand, right? When we think of spirituality on completely naturalistic terms, it is pure self-delusion to
Yeah.
think that if you are just atoms, I mean, think about it. If you are just mindless, blind, deaf, dumb atoms, everything means nothing. There's
You,
no point in you having family,
you know,
apart from deluding yourself.
yeah. You know, I really like the way you put that, and it reminded me of something Yuval Noah Harari, the author of famous history books, Sapiens and others. He said this thing. It just stuck in my mind when I read it. He said that when you think of irrational religious beliefs, you think of Christians and Muslims and Jews, but he says feminism and human rights and all this stuff, he says, is all collective fiction, because he's an atheist, he's a naturalist. So he's like, he's written this book for an atheist audience, right? And he's basically saying, don't think you're high and mighty and you're intellectual. You're just as deluded as those theists, because you believe in human rights, you believe in feminism, you believe in these value-based systems. You are just in this collective fiction. And for him, money is as much of a collective fiction as feminism or human rights is. Right? It's just, we've all agreed upon something, but it has no basis whatsoever. So I really like the way you put it there. And I think, when you speak about, you're speaking about death and these types of things, something came to mind which really got me thinking. There's a friend of mine who used to be a hardcore naturalist. Like, there's those people who are kind of like, meh, a bit, they're atheists, but they're not naturalists, right? He was a pure naturalist. And then later on, many years later, he became a theist and then became a Muslim. He gave an example which really shocked me, and it reminded me, I thought of the example when you were speaking about death. He was following this guy who was an atheist, and that atheist was diagnosed with cancer, and he had atheist friends. And when he got cancer, he went to his friends and he informed them, and he expected them to comfort him and all these things. And what he basically realized is they ditched him, not because they don't care about him, but his cancer was a reminder to them of their mortality, perhaps, and they just didn't know how to deal with it. And then that guy, he said that he hadn't been to the church in like 20, 30 years or whatever it was. And he went back to the same church that he used to go for before, after his cancer diagnosis, and he's welcome with open arms, because he's just looking for meaning now. Like, okay, he's got this terminal illness, he's going to die. And his network of friends, even if they want to help him, they simply can't, because they don't have the epistemic tools to even help him understand or know what to do with his life. Everything is, maybe he's set off alarm bells in them by his diagnosis. So, when you're speaking about death, I think it's important for people to understand that it is so difficult for these new atheists and naturalists to reconcile living a meaningful life while knowing, in the words of Robert Greene, when he, in his book, Laws of Human Nature, he has a section on a bullet to the side. A bullet to the side meaning is related to a story that he tells about when you basically know you're going to die, right? When you know you're going to die and you have this time period in between having a bullet on the side and dying, right? That gap. And we can see this in Christopher Hitchens, right? I think Christopher Hitchens, what happened to him in front of the entire atheist movement, I think psychologically woke them up. And straight after his death, we see the rise of Peterson. I don't see these things as unconnected. And I do think, I mean, I want your thoughts on this. Do you think what Asadullah Ali said about Jordan Peterson swooping up half of the new atheist movement, do you think that was a overstatement? Or do you think actually people like Peterson, because of their works on maps of meaning and his general ideas about living a meaningful life, do you think that did attract a lot of atheists?
Yeah, so I think just for the people who don't know, so Christopher Hitchens was one of the four horsemen, right? The big four. He died in 2011 from cancer, right? His last book is Nothing. It's called Nothing. So I do recommend you read that if you're interested in spirituality from an atheistic angle. But coming to your point, Subboor, I mean, this is the first time I've seen those 2 points connected. And when you said that, I'm like, wow, subhanAllah, you're actually right. Because if I mean, remember, these guys were like the prophets of the era. Remember the pedestals that they'd be put on. They'd be in conferences, and they went everywhere, man. They went everywhere. They were on BBC, CNN. This is a huge movement, right? And so I think now, having thought about Peterson, he swooped in exactly the right moment when a vacuum was pumped post Hitchens. And I think you may be right, or Asadullah, in fact, may be right, that he created a wave of meaning that new atheism was unable to fulfill.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just wanted to add something really before I forget, because some of these ideas just come to me. I've seen myself, because we've been involved in these activities dealing with new atheists. I've seen myself this firsthand, right? So when we went to the atheist conference in 2011, the World Atheist Convention, Richard Dawkins, Rebecca Watson, Aaron Ra, all these people were there, these new atheists. And, we saw firsthand how religious of a movement it was. And there was actually a Guardian or Independent newspaper article in which someone said, oh my God, it's Richard Dawkins. So they were talking about how Richard Dawkins is now evoking this religious feeling in people. And what's interesting is that while this is going on and there's these religious sentiments of the new atheist movement, and it started to wane post 2012, I firsthand saw people who were atheists turning towards religion. I saw this myself. I'll give you one clear example that I can't forget. Hamza debated Professor Arif Ahmad at Cardiff University, right? And I was there at the time, and the atheist representative of their society, whatever it was called, he was the MC of the event. I found out later on that he became a Christian.
Wow.
When I went to a debate with Muhammad Hijab to Cosmic Skeptics debate, the first one that they had, one of the people with Connor, who was himself an atheist, he said, if I turn to a religion, I'll turn to the religion of my ancestors, of Christianity. So, and even with Alex, you see him now turning and becoming more softer towards not only Islam, but Christianity as well. So we're seeing this again and again and again. And in fact, there's a really funny conversation between Richard Dawkins and Alex O'Connor, and when Richard Dawkins says theology is not even a topic. And Alex obviously doesn't accept that because that's what he studied. But you can see that the newer generation of atheists, they're not accepting this crude, simplistic idea that religion is totally useless. I mean, just look at people who heavily disagree with us, people like Douglas Murray, right? You know, Douglas Murray argued in favor of the efficacy of religion at Cambridge while being an atheist. I mean, the best way to summarize his thoughts are, and actually he says this in his book, The Strange Death of Europe, that, you know, it's important for us to have believers in society, and he's quoting someone else's sentiment, that as long as someone else does the believing, because they know it's not true, right? And we've seen, oh my God, I completely forgot to mention this. Ayaan Ali Hirsi.
Yes, I was about to say her. Okay, we're on the same page. Yes,
Ayaan Ali Hirsi. I mean, I was in complete disbelief. I'll be honest with you. I actually had to verify it because I thought it was fake news. I actually thought it was fake news. I thought, no way this has happened. What did you think? What was your first reaction when you heard this?
So, bro, I mean, I was taken aback, because she was somebody who was very, very harsh against religion, particularly Islam. I mean, I've read all her books, Heretic. I've read, Does Islam Need a Reformation? La da 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 da. And for her to do such a U-turn, I was like, wow. So for those of you who are unaware, right? There's this lady, I think she's Somali born, right? Somali born? I think is that right?
Ex-Muslim, yeah. Somali.
Yeah, she's a Somali born ex-Muslim, shot to fame, literally shot to fame, right? And she mentions in her book Infidel, like a story of how and why she left Islam. So she talks about, for instance, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I'll write it down. So Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she has an autobiographical book, and in that book, she talks about why she left Islam. And I remember some very vivid episodes. She talked about, for example, whenever she had asked questions to her family, she would say, she would be informed, don't ask stupid questions, right? So she was discouraged from, questioning. Then, and I remember this, and subhanAllah, in the latest book to do with atheism, the latest publication with Oxford University Press, they quote this very paragraph because it touched them so much. She talked about how her family members, remember, this is not an Islamic practice, so to speak. It's just maybe a specifically cultural thing. But anyways, she was tied down. Her arms were pressed down by two family members. Her legs, one was pressed by her mother, one was pressed by her grandmother. And then she went through FGM. She says that. And I remember I was like, whoa. But for those of you who don't know FGM, female genital mutilation. Right? And I was thinking, wow, that's pretty rough, whatever that is. And then for her, so the reason why me and Subboor are talking about her right now is because this was a very aggressive lady who had no respect for religion. Like, she was so big at one point, she was referred to as the fifth horseman. She was referred to as the fifth horseman, right? So she was prominent. And anyways, she recently, just a couple of weeks ago, she professed her belief in Christianity.
You know what's shocking about that? Not only is it that she did this, but in a way, she forecasted, because only afterwards did I think about what happened, and I linked to something else. She has a talk online maybe 7-8 years from now, right? A long time ago. And she basically said that Muslims are not going to become atheists. We have to accept this. They're writ large not going to become atheists. So in order to counter the Islamic threat, we should promote Christianity at the cost of Islam. And someone in the audience took exception to that and really challenged her on it in the Q&A. He said, religion is fiction or whatever, standard stuff. Why are we going to replace one false belief by another false belief? And she stood her ground, boy. She said, you're naive. You don't understand. Muslims, like, to challenge Islam, you need another view, which has meaning. Like, you can't go from having meaning to nothing. So now that she came to Christianity, I remembered that talk I saw years ago. It just played in my head. And now it starts to make sense. She's just following her own advice.
Yeah, I do agree with some of the comments coming in, though, that I mean, some people said it's to do with the political element. That may be true. I also thought about, is this a money grabbing scheme? Like, is she just now taking opportunities here because the new atheism cow isn't carrying out any cash, right? So potentially she might be using this new post Peterson era to kind of, grab some new attention, maybe grab some new political fame, cultural fame. I'm not really sure, but there is this, that element as well. But but on the face of it, it definitely came as a shock to many, many people. I think no one anticipated. So remember, like I said, this is not somebody who's like junior. We're talking about somebody who was one point called the fifth horseman, the fifth horseman. And so that was definitely a
Yeah.
game changing thing. Sorry, go ahead, Subboor. I cut you off.
Yeah, so I was gonna add something. I'm just plugging in my laptop. I strongly believe it's not to do with money. And in fact, she's going to lose a lot of friends like this. So I'll explain my perspective. She had made herself into a brand. And remember, she's not piggybacking off atheism alone. She's piggybacking off feminism. So she's talking about a lot of issues to do with women. She was invited to a lot of podcasts. In fact, she achieved something which, to my knowledge, no atheist, a new atheist representative did, which is she got to speak at a government level in places like Chile, where she spoke about the challenge of dawah and speaking about how you guys in the government should stop dawah in these types of countries. And that was not too long ago. She actually wrote this. It's funny because we have, as IERA, one of our core campaigns going back 13 years was called the Challenge of Dawah, and her book, or it's a paper she wrote, it's also called the Challenge of Dawah, right? So I do not see any like, if it was financial benefit, it doesn't make any sense, because she had a career. She was still going strong. She's still being invited. She's still going strong. She didn't become obscure. This type of move is risky because her main bread and butter audience doesn't support her conversion. You could see this with because remember, Richard Dawkins is still way more famous than her. And he wrote her an open letter. I'm not sure if you saw, about her conversion. There's popular atheist YouTubers who have reacted to her in a negative way. So she's got a lot to lose. So I do not think it's to do with money. I do not think it's to do with relevance. I think it's purely because she wants to find meaning, probably because even though she had a terrible experience in Islam, she still had a meaningful life. And remember something, in one of her videos, she speaks about how she was, and this is most likely after the FGM, right? Because she talks about when she was in college or she was a teenager, she was very much supportive of and believed in the Muslim Brotherhood. That was a very powerful thing for her. So that means clearly she must have had some feelings towards religion and these spiritual types of feelings. And the atheism seems to have maybe come in much later when she came to Europe, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Mashallah, mashallah. So we've talked about the philosophy, we've talked about meaning. The last thing I wanted to touch upon, and this is before we'll open up for Q&A, inshallah, is the role of beauty in nature, bro. So I think that is also a very important component to spirituality, right? So if you look at some of our great scholars, like Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, for example, right? He talks about how he reflects on very basic things, right? Look at the child and its affinity to its mother. Look at just how bees make honey, right? Look how bees just develop their hexagonal structures, their beehive, right? Look at the rotation of night and day. Look at the creation. Look at, and basically just inferring beauty in nature, right? And how that leads to a very meaningful life. only on the basis of that there must be a source to this beauty. There must be a source to this beauty, right? And there's this one beautiful verse, and this verse is actually, for me personally, is connected with Lamia. Why? Because she was trying to refer to this verse, and I switched off in that lesson at one point, and then I realized what she was referring to. So this is this verse right here in Surah Fussilat, right? This is a very, very famous verse, right? سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ, right? So it's a very, very, very famous verse. So we have shown them, will show them our signs, right? Ayatina fil afaq. So in the universe, right? Wafi anfusihim, in themselves, right? And this is very, very important. So you're talking about all dimensions, from you all the way to the starry skies, right? And this for me is, I think, another key component of spirituality, because many of our great scholars use this as an impetus to be thankful, to be grateful, to be respectful to the one who created all of this. Now, what's very interesting, and I'll hand it over to you. I remember Sheikh Al-Qadi, he mentioned a very important statement, and it's been with me since, right? He says that, look at how people live today. All of us live in an urban structure, right? So we live in an apartment, we live in a... Sorry, I'm switching off because it's very late in my time. Sorry, we live in apartments or we live in villas, right? So, yeah. And as a result of that, we're always enclosed in four walls, right? Previously, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, right? People were not living like this. People were living very openly with nature, right? And so Sheikh Al-Qadi said that we today, the urban kid today, does not even see a tree grow. Oh, hang on, you guys can't see my screen? Oh, sorry. Can you guys see it? Can you guys see what I'm saying? Right? So this is the verse that I was talking about. سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. This is the one that I was referring to, right? This is a very famous verse. So this yeah, Sheikh Al-Qadi said the urban kid today does not even see a plant grow, Subboor. Right? It doesn't even see a plant grow. Yeah. We are so disconnected from nature, right? And Sheikh Al-Qadi believes, or rather he mentions something to the effect of, that induces atheism, that disconnect from nature, you know? And for me personally, Habibi, wallah, yani, I even though I live here, I don't like living in Dubai. It's a very plastic place to be in, right? I don't get nature here. SubhanAllah, people get very confused why I'm constantly walking in the UK. It's because the green leaves affect me. You know, when I walk near lakes, when I walk near rivers, it's just breathtaking, bro. It's just breathtaking. That this was created by a God who loves us, who did this for us. And I think subhanallah, right? You just feel nothing but shukr, just feeling gratefulness. So I'll leave it there. I just wanted to share this last point with you.
Yeah. Allahu Akbar. You know, when you were speaking, I was actually thinking about a quotation from Richard Dawkins' book, River Out of Eden. It's a really powerful description of the human improbable experience about we open our eyes in a world, and I just couldn't find the quote, but I remember like it was so beautifully worded. I mean, that's one gift he has. He's very good at writing. And the other thing which came to mind, and this is why I was smiling when you were talking with what about nature and how it evokes religiosity. In Speaker's Corner, we get to meet all types of people. And now, Shoaib, we've got to a level where if anybody's talking about Christianity, you know they're Christian. And everybody else, you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar that they are going to be agnostic or an atheist. Like, that's the level of society in London now. I remember there was this man on this ladder, and he was standing up and speaking, and he was speaking about feminism and bashing feminism, and a lot of atheists bash feminism as well. And I just went up to him and started speaking. So while I was speaking to him, he was speaking about certain things that we agree on. Anyway, afterwards, I said to him, "Do you believe in God?" And he said something very interesting, and it stuck with me. He said, "I'm a gardener." I see creation. I do believe in God. That was it. And he was really like, he wasn't just some random person. Like he was educated. He was educated, he was articulate. Yet when it came to him, like his belief in God, and he was, remember, this is in the context of him orating the problems with feminism and all this other sophisticated arguments that he's coming up with. And he actually had a lot of knowledge of, a lot of topics. But when it came to his belief in God, it was simply to do with him seeing nature. That was it. That was it. It was literally nothing else. I also believe that we have to sometimes let the beauty of nature not be numerically discounted through argumentation or quantification of some sort. Because this sometimes happens. Well, how can you show that? I mean, forget all of that. Sometimes it's about evoking something so deep inside that you don't need to even make it into an argument. It's just there. There's actually, if you go onto YouTube and you watch BBC Question Time, right? There's a particular episode that they had to do with, should we teach creationism in schools, right? And there's a Muslim guy on there with the name of Dawood. And what's really interesting is, in his story, he was a hardcore Darwinist, a hardcore atheist, studying evolutionary biology at university, in the University of Leicester. And he saw the cell through the microscope, and he was studying the cell, and it just hit him there and then that there has to be a God. In one instant, it just hit him. Then he started looking at the stars, and his paradigm shifted. And then he was on the BBC Question Time arguing why creationism should be taught in schools. I mean, he did a complete U-turn, even though he has a biological background, right? So the power of the beauty can penetrate the stiff hearts which have been clouded by all this argumentation and shubahat and desires and all these types of things. I think you're absolutely right. The beauty can just penetrate all of those armors.
Yeah, man. I think that, so you talked about evolutionary biology, and I think that's not just that. I think there are many, many sciences that, as you get deeper and probe into it much more, you just think like, how can I attribute this to mere chance? I mean, like, look, even a baby, right? A child can understand exactly that this is uber complex, this kind of thing, right? So let's take one of the basic units of biology, the DNA, right? The DNA itself is constructed in such minutiae fashion, right, that it just begs the question. I mean, it can store a library. You can store a library on a DNA footprint. That's what you can do. And it just boggles the mind. Because remember, when we discovered microscopes, we didn't anticipate that there would be something called DNA. We didn't anticipate there would be cellular machinery. We didn't anticipate there'd be protein formation and all of these jazzy things, right? We just discovered these in the past 150 years. Look at also fine-tuning, right? Look at fine-tuning. Who was it? Dyson? Dyson, the famous physicist, who said nothing shook my faith more than the fine-tuning argument. This is a top-level physicist, yeah? Top-level physicist. And so I believe that science can definitely be used as an instrument to climb towards this understanding that there is a creator and there is beauty and there's Rahman nature, right? I don't usually talk like that. People usually see me as a very hardcore philosopher. This is the first time I'm speaking like this quite openly, but this is how I generally feel. This is how I think, right? But yeah, I think that when I discover more and more things through science, I feel more and more affirmed in my belief that there's a creator out there. It's not just pure philosophy. It's not just pure abstraction.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because while you were speaking, I was thinking of Anthony Flew.
By the way, this is us speaking raw. Like this, none of this is scripted. Subboor, did we plan any of this?
Oh no.
This is none of this is planned. It's literally unscripted, right?
Yeah.
You cannot share this on YouTube. It's haram for you. Go ahead, Subboor.
Yeah. Anthony Flew, you said something which Flew basically said. Flew was a class A philosopher.
Yeah.
He was an atheist. He was very vocal about it. He wrote papers about it. Death by a Thousand Cuts, his famous argument against God. Theology and Falsification. That paper was one of the most published, widely circulated paper in the Western world.
Yeah.
And when he did a U-turn, and remember, this is a very sophisticated philosopher who's coming up with well thought out arguments against God, right? When he turns around and believes in God, he doesn't become a theist. He just believes in a type of deism. I would expect, you would expect, just like he wrote Theology and Falsification in his other works, he would come up with something really robust and crisp and at the edge of, philosophical argument, but he didn't. He simply pointed out the DNA. He simply pointed out the beauty, the design of the world. That was it. Shoaib, for me, his book was written as if he had never studied philosophy. He did not ever subscribe to atheism. He's just a simple farmer talking about a random biology textbook he picked up, and he saw the DNA and he saw the design, and he's just in awe, like a child. Yet this is somebody who, all his philosophical jargon could not protect him from the feeling of design, of beauty of the world that he just saw when he tried to look at it objectively.
Well, Subboor, I think we've spoken enough. I think we pushed that a lot out there. I think we'll give it now the chance for people to kind of step in. Guys, this is the opportunity for you to, ask any questions that you may have, throw in some comments. We wanted to give you some flavor of spirituality and atheism. So both of us, we've looked at this, we've spoken about this as well. Subboor actually has plenty of lectures on spiritual. I think you have one on your YouTube channel, right? Darwinian Delusion, Subboor, right?
Yeah, atheism and spirituality. I have a talk at Nust University, Islamabad. You can have a look.
There we go. Yeah. So this is the reason why I invited Subboor, because I think that he would have a lot to offer and say here. So yeah, any questions, guys? Anything that you want to add or say? If you have nothing, just to type in the chat no, so then we can know that we can close off the discussion. But otherwise, feel free to bring it in. Subboor, while we have people type, I see people typing in stuff. While we have people typing in stuff, are there any recent upcoming videos that you're going to be doing in Darwin Delusion, or recent one that you've done related to the topic of spirituality and atheism?
Nothing in particular. But one thing I do want to do is on the channel bring in people who disagree with us, and just have a word with them and see where we can converge, because I would love to have a equivalent conversation to the conversation you had with Steve McRae, where you guys converged on things that usually you will not find an atheist and a theist converging on. I would love to have an equivalent discussion with an atheist with a strong philosophical background, where we converge on atheist spirituality, where we agree the absurdity of it. Because
I think I have someone for you.
Okay.
I think I have somebody in mind. Yeah, he's a philosopher. He's actually written books on ID as well. Very, very, very interesting guy. I quote him a lot in my works as well. He has this brilliant article called Prolegomena to the Metaphysics of Physics. It's very, very good. I'll send it to you. But he'd be a great person to I think get on your channel. Sure. Right. So we have a question here. So one is to do with my series. I'll put that in the end. But Taha is asking, what is new atheism exactly, and how is it different from usual atheism? Taha, didn't we study this at the beginning of the course? Astaghfirullah al-Azim. So didn't we study this at the beginning of this course? Okay, so we'll go ahead, answer this question, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways you can answer it. I would say new atheism was a social movement post 9/11 in reaction to the last remnants of religion that seemed to still have power in the world, and it wanted to jettison a new enlightenment, a new secular perspective on the world. It's like not waiting 9 months for a delivery, just trying to rip open and get the baby out after 2 weeks, right? They just wanted to speed things up, and everybody, saw that the hurry that they were in. So it wasn't just social; it was also political. Remember this, Shoaib? It was also political. The Reason Rally. Do you remember the Reason Rally? Right? See, the Reason Rally for me was one of the greatest evidences that it was a political movement, and the Reason Rally, 4 years after the first one, which was very successful, with the numbers dwindled significantly, as you probably know, was again one of the signs of the decline of the empire. So new atheism has been galvanized by the likes of the Four Horsemen: Dawkins, Hitchens, Dennett, and Harris. And its primary target, I would say, was Islam. That was their primary target. Christopher Hitchens, one of the new atheists, he famously said, the ones fighting Islam are us and the American army. This is a famous statement that he actually has. So you could see that while the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was going on, they saw themselves as fighting another war against Islam, which is why you would find, many of them making really outlandish statements against Islam and Muslims across Europe.
Right. Hope that answered the question, Taha. And go back to the notes from the first few classes. Okay. All right. Okay. So Abbas is asking, not directly related to the topic, but are we going to touch on morality and atheism at some point? Can't seem to find anything related in the curriculum. I'm not sure if we'll touch upon morality. There will be a discussion about politics, and new atheism that Osama will handle. I might ask him to touch this conversation there as well to some degree, but we don't have a ethics and or morality and atheism as of yet. Perhaps this is something we can do in a future iteration. Good suggestion, Abbas. Rafe is asking, or saying rather, I feel like Alex O'Connor. For those of you who don't know Alex O'Connor, he's a very well-known atheist, agnostic, and he's very articulate, mashallah. He has his own YouTube channel that I think will be good to look into, right? So Alex O'Connor is becoming progressively more not just sympathetic but desperate for belief in God, with his talking about how he feels envious whenever he hears a beautiful psalm being recited, or that one time when he said that all he needs is one moment of God to make himself known to him, and he'll be set to be a Christian forever, when talking about divine headedness. Alex O'Connor says he feels scared at the thought of hell sometimes. What do you think of that, Subboor?
Yeah, I mean, the way I would put it is that his journey is definitely far from new atheism, right? A lot of people were very critical of me when I debated him, because they said I was being too nice to him, because they saw hijab demolishing him. And that was because I believed something very different about him. And, we all have our hunches. And my hunch was that actually I can see this guy coming towards God. And that was when he was a strong atheist. And we've progressively seen, his interactions with Christians on Premier Radio and other places. I'm in communication with him on WhatsApp. Sometimes we talk, and I can see he's headed towards that direction. I can clearly see it, and he has accepted his mistakes in the past, which is important. Yeah. One of the things which you'd be interested in knowing is you'd find an interview between him and myself on my channel, in which I grilled him on some of the things that he said which got him into trouble. And one of the things that he says on the channel, and one of the things that we know he did do, is while he was doing theology, he studied Islamic medieval scholars. And that woke him up. He says that changed his mind, because previous to that, he wasn't aware. So this is while he was at Oxford. He looked into, I'm not sure which scholars, but I'm sure it must have been Ghazali and Razi and others. So I think, inshallah, I can see him coming to belief in God and maybe Islam. But I think Alex's story is one of many. I can see many new atheists coming towards religion. In fact, Shoaib, this is very interesting. Some new atheists are not just being attracted by the failure of new atheism and its promises, right? They're also being attracted by these sociological elements in Islam, the family structure, the feeling of identity, and these types of things. Andrew Tate, actually, believe it or not, he's actually had an impact as well. And somebody may say, well, he's not an intellectual, how is he going to have an impact? The thing is, intellectuals are just as impacted by popular figures as anybody else. They're not immune to it. It's not going to be a case of, oh, he's not educated, therefore he's not going to have an impact on society. Actually, you can have very influential people who are not academics.
Yeah. No, I follow YouTube very, very closely. So I follow the blue. I know many people will be shocked by this, but I follow the blue pill and the red pill movement. Because I'm a parent. I want to know exactly what is my son going to be ending up into if he goes on social media.
Yeah.
And so I follow Andrew Tate. I do believe that there are some issues with some of his stances a little bit, but overall, yes, I do agree. But I also believe that Andrew Tate is a bit of an idiosyncratic story for one reason. I think there's also a lack of confidence of confident men and confident women as Muslims, and Andrew Tate fits that category really well, right? I think that's also one of the reasons why when you have hyper feminism, you have an increasing number of attack on masculinity. And I think Tate responds to that hyper feminism really, really strongly. And I think that's what attracts a lot of these young people towards him and through him to Islam. Because, as soon as he converted, he started talking about Islam on his channel as if he's like this old-time, Muslim. And it's creating a great effect where a lot of these young people are following Tate. And I remember even when he was kind of shooting up to fame, his name was circulating everywhere. But my worry, and here's just the worry that I have, is that Andrew Tate is from one angle trying to represent Islam, but I also believe that there's an allure towards rich, fame, cars. Yeah, and I think that there's a danger there that I don't want young people to be impressioned by. I think that's the only caveat that I'd have with Andrew Tate. But I agree with you that people like Andrew Tate are being very influential in this online space. Because remember, let me just be clear, right? I even watch Akhi Ayman. You know who Akhi Ayman is, Subboor, right? So many people don't know him. Many people would be shocked that why am I following someone like Akhi Ayman, right? I follow Akhi Ayman because he reaches out to people I can never reach to. MashaAllah, he is so good with this new, like he is Dawah Man 2.0, but without the problems at the moment, right? That's how I see Akhi Ayman, MashaAllah. He's so good. And mashallah, the way he speaks to the youth, the way he gives them that raw reality, the way he talks about his own experiences, how he was, in the gangs that he was involved with, I just feel that is an amazing person. So every person is a brick in the house of Islam, and they're each, fulfilling certain needs that we can do, right? An intellectual cannot relate to a person from the street. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Although I believe, this is exactly right. But I believe a lot of intellectuals are unaware of what you're saying. And they have this pompous attitude where they don't want to engage with the wider world because they think, oh, these people are like, I remember there's one intellectual, he said about the Tablighi Jamaat, just a bunch of simpletons. And, and I was really offended by that because I've spent my time floating around various different Islamic movements and groups, and I spent time at the Tablighi Jamaat, and it was one of the best times of my life. Now, someone may say, but you're going and you're doing the same thing again and again. But as a sociological movement, they are one of the biggest movements in the world. They are one of the biggest movements in the world. They have very sincere, beautifully, mannered brothers. They build your character through patience and these types of things. Fair enough, people have problems with them or whatever it is. But we, as intellectuals, no intellectual should ignore a powerful sociological movement.
Yeah.
Nobody should do that. In fact, There's a really interesting book I want you to read. It's really small. It's called The Believer by Eric Hoffer, right? And Eric Hoffer has this chart, and he's describing that society has these radicals, right? And these radicals, they're like 5% on the left or 5% on the right, like say communism and capitalism or whatever, right? Something. And he says society writ large doesn't actually have a worldview, is not left or right. And it's these radicals that stand up and shout, and they galvanize the majority towards them, whoever's shouting the loudest. So the battle of civilization, of society, of an empire is based upon the minority vocal people fighting out each other until one minority wins and wins over the group. And this is who these people are. I mean, I'm not saying anything about Ahmad or Andrew Tate or anybody else, but these popular figures, they represent a perspective, and they can easily I mean, just think about 10 years ago. I would never think somebody could be that anti-feminist, right? And become famous. Now, obviously, I don't agree with, clearly there's things that he says we cannot agree with. I mean, they just sound, and this is obviously before he became Muslim, but still anti-women almost, right? Yeah. But still, Shoaib, I would not believe somebody could be so famous 10 years ago, holding such radical views. And you can imagine 10 years from now, you may find, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a radical right-wing Christian sociological movement in Europe. Now, you may think, no, Europe's left Christianity, it's over. I'm seeing it. I am seeing that movement in Latin America. I'm seeing that movement in America. I'm seeing, by the way, Shoaib, London, if you want to go to a religious gathering, there's only two places you're going to find lots of people in congregation. One is the Friday prayer and Muslims, and the second is evangelical born-again Christians. Their churches are packed. They're opening up mega churches, and they are so loud and vocal, and they're youthful, right? There's a lot of young people. I can easily see a movement like that just sweeping Europe. So you have to keep in mind that, you know, you can't keep your finger off the pulse when it comes to these things, because things can change very quickly.
Yeah, I 100% I agree with you there. I had one point, and I think my brain is so tired that I forgot what that point was. But it was to do with this online stuff. It'll come to me, inshallah. It'll come to me. I'll just mention another question here. We have a question by Muhammad Muzammil. Why was Buddhism or Hinduism not the targets of new atheists, despite having a significant majority in some places?
I actually have I'm really keen on answering this question. The new atheist movement was targeting what it called political religion, right? So Islam is a political religion. Christianity is a political religion. The likes of these new atheists, they are happy for us to do soup kitchens. They are happy for us to pray in our homes. They're happy for us to keep religion within our doors. They just don't want the religion in the schools. They don't want intelligent design being taught at schools. They don't want senators who believe in creationism or believe in God and to take an oath on the Bible or the Quran. So that's the real issue. They have no problem with you. In fact, they would love a religion which is so passive, which is so meek and submissive, which is there. In fact, this is in their favor, a religion which is trying to teach you morality without theism, right? So this is why I believe the new atheists have been critical of Islam and Christianity and Judaism, but they haven't been critical of the likes of Buddhism.
Yeah, I hope that answered the question, Muhammad. So I remembered what the point was, right? So Asadullah, for those of you who don't know who Asadullah is, he's a very famous, I mean, he's mashallah like Subboor, right? In the da'wah scene, very big guy. And he recently switched off from da'wah, right? For various reasons, and I respect reasons. But his last statement, and I saw his last video, which he uploaded, and in there he made a prediction. And I think that prediction might come true. I don't know how much you might agree with this, Sabor. And it's to do with spirituality. It is connected to all of this, because I think that it all boils down to meaning and implementation of that meaning. He said that we are going to see an increase in hypermasculinity, chauvinistic versions of Islam, and it's going to put a lot of our sisters off, such that we will see an increase of Muslim women leaving Islam. I don't know, and that's why I remember this. You know, when you pointed to Andrew Tate, right? That's where this is where I remembered his point from, and I personally do think there's some truth to that. Wallahu a'lam what the future holds. Wallahu a'lam what the future holds. But I do see that that can be a very strong reality. And by the way, just to be clear, right? Asadullah stated this. He has a daughter. He has a daughter, right? So he's more hyper aware of the challenges women are going to face as a parent of a daughter. I don't have a daughter. I wish I had a daughter, right? So I'm not saying that his prediction is going to be true, but I do see a possibility of it being true. I don't know what you guys think about that, guys. I'm talking to the people in the class.
Oh, this is such a profound point. I actually said this to someone recently. We challenge feminism on its foundational falsehoods. You know, this the idea that gender is a social construct and patriarchy is a social construct, and toxic masculinity, all this stuff. However, let's kick aside all these theoretical discussions. Sometimes think of it as a occupying force versus a resistance force. Sometimes a resistance force can do actions which are immoral, but their overall concerns are legitimate. Okay? However, the occupying force will focus on their immoral acts while not acknowledging the legitimate oppression that's been done. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the things that I said when I was taking my sister somewhere a few days ago, and in the car I said, why have I never heard imams speak about forced marriages? I've been to khutbahs all my life. Why do they not talk about this topic? Because this is very common. It's very common, because there's old men in their congregation that they probably know of that give money to the masjid that have forced their daughters to marry. There is physical abuse happening in certain families. So when feminists stand up, especially in Muslim countries, and they are talking about equality and they're talking about these things, and then they are smuggling in atheism and liberalism and these other ideas which are un-Islamic, under the guise of, we are fighting for your equal pay, we're fighting so you're not abused at home, we're fighting so that you're not forcibly married, we're fighting so you don't go through FGM. The way to fight them is not by saying, let's theoretically refute feminism, is by actually dealing with those social ills Islamically, so that there is no legitimate concern. Because this is something my wife said to me once, and it really stuck with me. She basically said, you won't have a feminist if there's real men in the family. If there's men who take care of a woman, men who protect a woman, men who provide, men who protect, men who take care of her rights and keep her happy. Like, you can't have feminism flourishing out of that society. It's because of those legitimate concerns that you get. And it's true. I've seen this. Like in the UK, we don't have imams talking about interest being haram. You do not get that. I have not heard that, because people in the congregation have houses on interest. Likewise, these types of social ills, if imams are not going to speak about them, du'at are not going to speak about them, then why would women not go towards these feminist ideas? Why wouldn't they? And that would be our fault. So I think Asadullah is definitely onto something.
Yeah. I remember when he said that, I was just kind of blown away, and I got scared. Because usually when he makes a prediction, he was right about scientism, and I think he might be right about this. The sisters in the group, do you agree to that? So Lamia said yes, she agrees. And then Zainab said the problem is that there are men in Muslim community who think that women are less in value. That's also true. I've come across that as well.
Here's the biggest evidence of it, right? So I go with my missus, we need to go central London, we need to go here, we need to go there. She combines and leaves the house because there's no place for her to pray. Especially in the wintertime, the time's so short, there's no place for her to pray. Like, even in Muslim countries, there's no place for people to pray. Like, women cannot pray. Like, you have a huge market in Islamabad or Karachi or Dhaka or wherever, and, markets full of people. People are in the markets from morning till evening. And, the mosques are just for men, right? Alhamdulillah, in Malaysia, you don't get this. I was very happy to see in Malaysia, there are mosques everywhere for women as well. In Turkey, you don't get this. In Arab countries, you don't get this. But in Desi communities, bro, it's almost like, they're offended. The idea of a woman going to a mosque.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest, what Sister Zainab Said said, right? What's better evidence that Muslim men think less of women than they even think of them less spiritually, that they don't even let them pray. My sister the other day she was telling me that she had an appointment at a clinic and there was a masjid, and she sent her husband to go check, and he said there's no place for women to pray. So what's she going to do? Yeah.
Mashallah. So, should we take one more, or are we ready to close off, Subboor? What do you prefer?
I'm interested in your thoughts
on
about spirituality and atheism, because this is something you've never written about.
Yeah,
I would love to see you write about this.
Yeah, so you remember that first book that came out in 2018? So that book was like the first attempt to kind of write all this. I am working on a book on a new atheism in Islam, purely from Ghazali's angle, but it's not like overly philosophical in nature. I do take his philosophical ideas, but Ghazali has written a lot on spirituality. And I'm trying to use that to talk about all of these things that we looked at here, right? How do we understand meaning? How do we understand beauty? How do we understand practice of those things? So there's a quote by Mufti Muhammad Shafi. He's the author of Ma'arif al-Quran. You know the famous tafsir from Pakistan? Do you know about it, Subboor?
Yeah.
So this one line, I think, addresses everything that we have discussed with regards to men and women. Do you get? And not just men and women, everything, right? He said, if everyone fulfilled their duties, no one would complain about their rights. I mean, just think about how powerful that statement is, right? If everyone fulfilled their duties, no one would complain about their rights. If men fulfilled their duties, we wouldn't have complaints of women.
Yeah.
If men fulfilled their duties, men wouldn't complain about women, right? And I think there's a really important message there to understand what the rights are. And I think that we'll leave it there, inshallah, as a segue to hopefully encouraging all the people here to further your studies, to know more about the message of Allah and the Deen of Islam. And hopefully that this conversation, for whatever it was worth, we hope that me and Subboor, we both hope that this was helpful for you. So to kind of put all things into perspective, what we wanted to do was just to provide, two different vantage points. And you can see me and Subboor we're very chilled about this topic. And we just wanted you to have some insights in this area. And to answer your question, Subboor, inshallah, there will be a book coming out soon on this. I just need to now start getting stable again. This is literally all of this here was under boxes, and I just have had to kind of I have 8,000 books to box, ship, and unpack books is a nightmare. So I'm not gonna do this again. I have one more move to make, and khalas, I'm not going to move again. But yeah, that's my response to you for now. Inshallah, there'll be a project coming out this in the future. All right.
Jazakallah khair.
All right, guys. Barakallahu feekum. I hope you enjoyed this session. Subboor, it was a pleasure to have you on board here again. We hope to have you again on in the future. Guys, if you enjoyed this, please do make dua for us, pray for us, and we'll do the same for you. And inshallah, may Allah give us rahmah. May Allah give us all the success that we need to become better Muslims in this life and the akhirah. Ameen. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Salam. Allah Hafiz.